Well, I may regret this, but quarter two, for our Old Testament study, we will be looking through the book of Ecclesiastes. I have no idea what possessed me to pick this one, but the more I read about it, the more I understand that no one really understands certain things about this book. One of the main things being, what is it doing in the Bible? It's cataloged along with the other wisdom writings like Proverbs and Job, but it's unlike any of the other books of the Bible. It's not uncommon for a book of the Bible not to be attributed to an author directly, but to have a traditional author in mind. But this one, traditionally, it's often been thought as written by Solomon because of certain things that are in it. But on the other hand, it's just as often been questioned whether it could possibly be Solomon because of certain things that are written in it. What we do know is that it's attributed to a pseudonym, variously translated as teacher or preacher or other things. It's a sort of an untranslatable word in the Hebrew, Qoheleth, which comes from a root meaning assembly. So it's this person who's either in charge of an assembly or addressing an assembly, or who assembles proverbs, wise sayings. So we have no information from that, but it does say son of David, king in Jerusalem, which is where a lot of the Solomon theory comes from, because you'll see as we get through this, it's the writings of someone who has tried everything that he can think of to find out what is worthwhile for a good life. But there's a lot of controversy over the contents. Again, it's not unusual, right? We have the example of Esther, where God is not actually mentioned, but is always present as the one who provides things in his own timing for his people's deliverance and prosperity. The problem with Ecclesiastes, though, is that though God is mentioned, there's a distance. And that has led some scholars to believe that whoever wrote Ecclesiastes was a skeptic and a pessimist. Now, there is a lot of pessimistic stuff in here, right? But there are various ways that you can look at it to understand why this would be preserved as part of the canon of Scripture. And to me, the first thing to notice is that there are actually two speakers in the book of Ecclesiastes. There's a frame that begins and ends the book where the preacher, Qoheleth, is referred to in the third person. We'll look at the opening frame in a little bit, but then, starting in verse 12 of chapter 1, it switches over to first person. I, Qoheleth, have been. So I think it's helpful to read this in terms of someone compiling what's essentially a monologue to present to readers. So you have an introduction where an unnamed narrator, or whoever is responsible for, like a scribe or whatever, for assembling this book, and it prepares the way for what you're about to read. And then you have I would say, a solid 11 chapters. There's only 12 total, but if you take away the frame at the beginning, at the end, it's a solid 11 chapters of a man musing about what makes a good life. And it's not what you'd think it is. So we're going to approach this book as an entirety. You cannot lift bits out of here safely any more than you can lift pieces out of the book of Job safely, right? Job has to be written as an entire story. If you start lifting things out, you can twist its message very easily. Same here with Ecclesiastes. You have to think of this in terms of the whole thing. And you also have to read it in the context of Scripture. One thing you will notice as we go through this, we will be referring to Genesis, the fall, and the frustration that creation was subjected to, the toil that often comes to nothing. And we'll also be referring, you might have heard it, to Romans. Because the main themes of Ecclesiastes all have to do with, well, to use one of the phrases, under the sun, a horizontal plane of human activity. So let's take a look at the first 11 verses. This is our opening frame where we're being prepared for what we're going to read. You can think of it as sort of a summary, a collection of the themes of Ecclesiastes. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises, the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. All things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? It has already been in the ages before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after. You can see why people think of this as pessimistic, a bit depressing, because it points out all the things that we spend our lives trying to ignore. First off, this word vanity, you will come across this many, many times in Ecclesiastes. Now, true, I am the flippant sort of person who walks through Lowe's and gets to the bathroom cabinet section and looks up at a particularly large one and thinks, ooh, vanity of vanities. But really, it's talking about the Hebrew word hebel, which literally means a breath or a vapor. Now, you can think about this in two ways. One, temporariness. A breath or a vapor, a wisp of steam is temporary. It's ephemeral. It's there and then it's not. And you can also think of it in the terms of meaningless. What purpose does it serve? What does it gain you? Because the writer, Qoheleth, this Qoheleth character is very concerned about what profits people, what is useful, what gets you somewhere. But his refrain is always Hebel of Hebels, that this vapor of vapors, vanity of vanities, everything ends up profiting nothing. And you might think, well, that's a bit extreme. You have to follow his argument all the way through to the end. Because it's not that he's saying that absolutely everything is of no use whatsoever. What he's looking at here, what is worthwhile as an end in itself? Keep that in mind, make a note of that, because it will be important to keep that and compare everything he says to what is worthwhile as an end in itself. But you notice, as he went through this introduction, the narrator is pulling out these themes of endless repetition. And he starts with nature. The nature of the human race itself. Generation comes, generation goes. There's never the defining generation. It's always the same. People don't change, no matter what technological advances they might make or unmake, whatever learnings they pursue. That last part, there is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be. People are not only unoriginal, but they tend to have very short memories, which is why I always find the New Year's Eve recap that the media likes to put through kind of interesting, because you see these things and you're like, seriously, was that still this year? I thought that was a lot longer ago. We pay attention to the now. That's how a song can become old in 6 months. News gets superseded by even fresher news or more lurid news, whatever you want to call it, and then it's more or less forgotten. Not many people are interested in history. I happen to be one of them, right? I enjoy looking at newspapers from before I was born. It's just really interesting to me. What do the ads look like? What do they talk about? What is the big news of the day? I enjoy looking at that because it gives me a sense of perspective, in part. But nature itself is characterized by repetition. Sunrise. You would be rather alarmed if one morning the sun rose in the north, wouldn't you? It just doesn't happen. The way things are set up, it always rises within the same range of the horizon, depending on the season. You can tell the season by where the sun is. These patterns repeat and repeat and repeat. And this bit about, the streams run to the sea and the sea never fills up. And the streams don't run out because, of course, you have the evaporation and then the storms and they run. You have cycles in nature. And while this is a source of comfort in a way, we can rely on these cycles and build practices accordingly. Yet sometimes it just looks like nothing ever reaches a conclusion or a completion. Now, that's fine with nature, but what about with your life? When he says, what does man gain by all the toil at which he toils? How many times can you use the word toil in a sentence? You start kind of feeling like you feel the burden, right? Repetition. Every day of the week, you have a pattern. Some of us get so entrenched in our patterns that we're almost speechless. We don't know what to do with ourselves when that pattern is disrupted. And it is true. You see, and yet you're never done seeing. You're never like, all right, I've seen enough now. And you hear, and you keep hearing, and after a while, if you're looking for completion in life under the sun, you will be disappointed, because none of these will ever be satisfied. And that is his point. We'll go through and look at the things he tries, all the things he tests to see, will this satisfy? Will this make life good? And his conclusion over and over again is, it has its uses, but it's no good as an end in itself. First half of Ecclesiastes will be his sort of catalog of vanities, where the things he tries, well, that was fine while it lasted, but it isn't an end in itself. And in the second half, he starts going more into sort of I've heard it described as a rambling monologue about things that make for a wise life, and yet there are things you'll find controversial if you're looking for cut and dried traditional biblical wisdom. But one of the reasons that I think it's worth studying Ecclesiastes is that wisdom isn't always cut and dried. You see this right in the debate, the argument, the contention between like Job and his friends, right? Because they have these ideas of how the world should work. Bad things happen to bad people, good things happen to good people. And if bad things happen to you, that makes you a bad person. But Ecclesiastes is very useful in pointing out that the interactions of the world are much more complex than that. And this strikes a very modern note. Ecclesiastes brings up some of those difficult questions of life that people without Christ ask daily. So it's worth grappling with them and trying to find a way to address them within a Christian worldview. So I will give you your reading assignment for next Sunday. I want you to read Ecclesiastes chapters 1 and 2. And when we come together again, we're going to look at the first round of things he tried that will make a good life.